Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm Blake Fisher. I'm one of those citizens, and I just happen to be a political junkie so that you don't have to be. So thanks for being here. In case you have not heard, President Biden is old. Is he too old for a second term, though? That's kind of the main question here. This week's release of the special counsel report into Biden's mishandling of classified documents, because I guess everyone needs to have a classified document scandal now, came to a specifically damning conclusion that he's, and I quote, an elderly man with a poor memory. And of course, Democrats in the media are trying to downplay this, just like they do with everything else related to his general incompetency. And I'll go through their points, why I think they're wrong, and then we'll talk about what the heck the Democrats can do about it, if anything. Spoiler alert, there's not much they can do. We'll pepper in some Trump stuff too, since, if Biden's having a really bad week, Trump can't help himself and manages to say something even more crazy to take the spotlight off of his opponent. I don't know why he chooses to do that, but he does. So let's get into it. So, we've been talking about this for a long time. My only sort of viral succession reel or YouTube kind of short was a clip of just Biden talking absolute word salad nonsense, or falling down, and all these things that we associate with old age and the sort of things that we would say, time to take grandpa's car keys away. And yet, it's just the media and Democrats write this off as a right-wing sort of, not conspiracy, but they're like, oh, you're just taking stuff out of context, or you're using, everyone forgets someone's name every once in a while. And that's absolutely true. But I think we can all see with our eyes what's actually going on here. And it doesn't, I don't know, this special counsel report just puts like an official stamp on what we all think already from the Department of Justice. So first of all, the number, when we talk about age, everyone's talking about Biden being old. It's not a specific number. I don't necessarily love the calls for things like term limits on age, like age limits for serving in office and stuff, because Biden is 81, but not every 81-year-old is like him. My great-grandma took up a new hobby of genealogy when she was 80 and lived to be 106. So her mind was super sharp. I had full-on conversations with her at night when I used to stay with her. She lived with my grandparents. My grandparents would be out of town, and I would stay with her when they were out of town. So she was living independently at 98, at 100, at 102 at my grandparents' house while they would be out of town on vacation, and I'd go stay over there to spend the night just, in case anything happened. But she was there by herself all day. Obviously, I would not think she was too old to be in Congress or, to be president or something, I guess. At 100, yeah, sure. But at 81, she was sharp as a tack, and there's plenty of people in Congress right now who are that age that I think would be sharp enough to do so. And so the number is not the problem. It's the, some 81-year-olds are fully coherent and can do everything, and they're totally independent, and it's fine. Some 60-year-olds are not. Some 60-year-olds have early onset dementia, and, I have a friend whose dad just died of that, and he was in his 60s. I don't even think he was 70 yet. And so, this is not a thing that we can just put a number on and say that that's the limit. Although maybe we could have some sort of tests or something that people have to take. I'm fine with maybe something like that. But the number's not the problem. It's that we can see with our eyes that he's aging rapidly. So, for example, Bob Dole, who at the time in Time magazine in 1996 was asking the question, is he too old for the job? This is in 1996 when Bob Dole was 9 years younger than Biden currently is. And, that was a guy that was sharp mentally into his 90s until he died, essentially. His brain never got foggy from what I understand. Physically, he was in a wheelchair in his 90s and when he died, but he was not, he was still giving speeches. I think he still had the wherewithal to potentially run the country, for example. And Mitch McConnell, honestly, until his fall last year, he's up there too in age, and he seemed totally with it. He's had a couple of those freezing incidents that were apparently sort of repercussions of that fall, but he looks older now. That one fall caused us to be able to see that, Mitch McConnell seems older now than he did 1 year ago, significantly, I think. And so we're always flirting with this when we've got a president that's that old. We're one fall away or one medical event away from sort of a disaster. It's not the same with senators and congressmen because, they're one of many. And it was ridiculous that Dianne Feinstein stayed in office until she died and was clearly, she had released power of attorney to all sorts of people and She was clearly not there and should not have been in the Senate, but that's one vote in the Senate. It's not the end of the world normally, whereas the president has control of the nuclear weapons and command of the military and has to make decisions in the middle of the night on geopolitical problems, So it's a bigger issue with the presidency than it is with Congress, and you can't really compare the two of them, in my opinion, okay? And so, 81 is old. It's 4 years older than the national average for dying. So the life expectancy is like 77.8 or something. He's 4 years older than that. And he would be 86 when he leaves office if he's reelected in 2024. Looking at the decline from 2012 Vice President Biden, in like, and I'll show a clip here in a second, like his debates with Paul Ryan, for example. He was always a gaffe machine. He always said silly things and stuff and said the thing that you weren't supposed to say out loud, or he's always been kind of a liar and he exaggerates things and he's kind of a bloviator and stuff. But it's not the same thing as it is now, so you can just look back a few years and it's quite different. And so we can see that with our eyes. We were all here and alive when he was vice president, and we've watched this deterioration. And I think it's even been bad over the last 4 years. And so, to be told that we shouldn't believe our lying eyes is, to me, crazy. We can see that he's rapidly aging. So, let's actually look back at that vice presidential debate, because I think it's important. So I'm going to play two clips here. The first is from that 2012 vice presidential debate, and I just picked a random little clip of him seeming very with it. He's arguing with Paul Ryan. He's going back and forth with the moderator. He even catches something he says incorrectly and corrects it immediately. And that's even different now when he says the wrong name or the wrong country or something, which we'll get to in the second clip. He doesn't correct himself. He doesn't even realize he said the wrong thing. So let's watch that clip, and then and then there's a second clip, which is from his press conference after this report was released. And so we'll see what let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and play the clip. It's a little bit out of order, but that's fine. We'll do it. Here we go.
He sent me 2 letters saying, by the way, can you send me some stimulus money for companies here in the state of Wisconsin? We sent millions of dollars. You know why he said
you did ask for stimulus money?
Sure, he
correct?
did. By the way,
on 2 occasions, we advocated for constituents who are applying for grants. That's what we do. We do that for all constituents who are.
Well, I love that. I love that. This is such a bad program, and he writes me a letter writes the Department of Energy a letter saying, the reason we need this stimulus.
So that's a good example. He says he wrote me a letter, and then he quickly changes it. He wrote the Department of Energy a letter. He quickly realizes his mistake. People say the wrong thing all the time, and this is a common defense of Biden. It's like, oh, well, people say the wrong name all the time. You're right. I call my kids the wrong name all the time. But I don't, I know that I said the wrong name. And even when I don't know, I have this other podcast where we talk about music with my buddies that I was in bands with in my 20s. And I'm always meaning to say Robert Smith, like from The Cure. And I accidentally say Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin. And I do it so much that I don't even realize I've said Robert Plant, and they start laughing at me and they're like, you did it again. And I don't even realize it. I just get the two Roberts mixed up, I guess. Lots of Roberts, and so I do it all the time, and I'm 40, and I get that it doesn't mean that we need to start testing me and put me in an old person's home, okay? So, but there is a difference between what happened here and what keeps going, so let's keep going. The other one we want to go to is this press conference that's going to happen. And so here's what happened to set this up. Let's just do so, because what happened is that the Robert Hur special counsel investigation, so to quickly catch you up in case you haven't been paying attention, because I would understand if you haven't been, in 2022, right before the midterm elections, Biden's staff or someone found that he had classified documents in his home and in an office, in a couple different offices. He basically found that he had documents he shouldn't have had. They did not alert the FBI or the archives, I guess, until after the midterm elections, which I think was shady. I think that they clearly knew it would affect it, especially because it wouldn't have been a huge deal, except that just a couple months prior, he had vilified Trump for there's no excuse for someone having classified documents when they know they weren't supposed to have them after they've left office. And then, whoops, embarrassing, Biden's done the same thing. Of course, Hillary Clinton sort of did this with her email servers that she set up. I think Hillary's was the most egregious because it left it open to hacking, whereas like you at least had to have physical access to Biden's house or Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate to be able to access these documents that they took with them. Either way, he had like said, there's absolutely no excuse for this. You've got to treat classified material properly. And then, whoops, it turns out that he has these classified documents. Now, there's a huge difference here in that Biden did cooperate with the authorities in the investigation. And part of this is that he sat down for an interview with the Department of Justice set up a special counsel to investigate this. This is one of those weird things where I would love to do an episode on with someone that knows more than I do. But there's some questions about it, whether it's constitutional or not, because a special counsel is not really within any of the branches of government, because normally it would be Congress that investigates a president, for example. But Congress, it's like, well, there might be partisanship there. And then if the Department of Justice was asked to look into it, the Department of Justice, Biden is their boss. This is why there was a special counsel for the Trump investigations into the sort of Russiagate stuff, which was nonsense. That's why Robert Mueller, apparently they're all Roberts. Robert Mueller did that one. Robert Hur did this one with Biden. So there's these there are these insulated special investigators that are apparently supposed to be not accountable to no one, but basically they don't have to answer to anyone, as far as even though Merrick Garland is the head of the Justice Department, as the Attorney General, it doesn't mean that he is in charge of this investigation. He's supposed to be hands off and not have anything to do with it, other than he approves the release of the findings, because this special counsel report, normally the FBI or the Department of Justice is not going to release every detail of an investigation that they choose not to bring charges on. But in the case of special counsels, they generally do for transparency reasons. Merrick Garland signs off on this thing and says, yeah, we can, it's fine. And we should release this to the public. And, it has these details in it specifically that it found that he had classified documents that he shouldn't have, and he discussed them with people that did not have clearance, but it found that it would be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a formal president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willfulness. And Democrats are now saying that this is beyond the pale for Robert Hur to have said in this report, to say that he, and I go back to the quote from earlier in the episode where basically called him an elderly man with bad memory. And they're saying he shouldn't have been able to do that. This is beyond the pale. He shouldn't have included anything about his memory. He's not a doctor. He's not a neurologist. He's not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, any of this stuff. And I think that's wrong, because this is a legitimate prosecutorial thing. If you don't think you can convince a jury of malice, or even if he knew what he was doing, that matters, because that's what Biden's defense would do. That's what anyone's defense would do. It'd say, look, he got confused. He didn't know he did the wrong thing. Even though, here's the part that really bothers me. James Comey, during the Clinton stuff, sort of set this new precedent of you've got to show ill intent for, I guess, the people that are elected, which I think is wrong. I think that the original letter of the law is if you mishandle classified documents, that's illegal. It doesn't matter if your intent was to share them with our enemies. It doesn't matter what the intent was. It is illegal. And we have a different set of standards for Donald Trump and for Hillary Clinton and for Joe Biden and Mike Pence and all of them that have taken classified documents with them. And I don't like that. I don't like any time that the law says, well, this person gets treated differently than this person. And because we've got people in jail right now for having mishandled classified documents because they're names you don't know. They're not elected officials. They're not elite. They just worked for the Justice Department or someone and had a clearance and took documents home or something and shouldn't have. Some people did nefariously try to share them. Obviously, that's a bigger problem. That's more of a treason situation if you're sharing them with our enemies. But these are just excuses. And either way, that's now the kind of standard, because Comey said it was reckless what she did. It was wrong, but it doesn't rise to the level of criminality because she didn't have the intention of doing this incorrectly. And that kind of set a new standard. And that's why Trump is in trouble, by the way, is because he did not give the documents back when they came back and asked for them. He said, nope, not going to give them back. And then he said, I did give them all back, and he lied about it. And then he had people try to hide the documents when they were going to come search for them. So Trump did a lot worse than Biden did in this case. But it doesn't change the fact that our national security secrets were just in a box in his garage. These were plans about Afghanistan. And the reason he kept them, by the way, which I think is important because it has to do with his ego, he was always against sending more troops into Afghanistan. He was adamant against it when he was vice president. And he had some memos and some handwritten notes and stuff from meetings where he would jot down like what his opinion was. And he even wrote this letter, I guess, to Obama. I don't have the date. I know it was Thanksgiving. I can't remember which year. I think it was 2009 or 10. Urging him to not send more troops into Afghanistan. And he kind of wanted to keep this to prove that he was right later on, I guess. It seems like that's what his purpose was, to be able to kind of like show it and be like, look, I was always against this. But either way, that's not legal. Now, his defense is that Ronald Reagan did this. And it's true. Ronald Reagan took all his notebooks back to his private residency that he had through his presidency. And it was kind of one of those tricky situations where it's like, are those private journals? Are they still private journals if they have classified information within them, even though it was like not the classified document itself? It's more like him writing the details of the classified documents. So to be fair, Biden does have some sort of precedent for this in the sense that Ronald Reagan did it and was not charged for such a thing, and it wasn't even a problem, apparently. So there are some defenses for him in the sense that there was like a previous president that did similar situations. Now, there is a difference here. The vice president does not have the ability to declassify information, whereas the president does. So that's a little trickier. Either way, the point is, these are just excuses. But the main point that I want to show you is that he has significantly deteriorated from that 2012 clip that I just showed into this is the press conference that happened after Robert Hur releases this report that says he's an elderly man, well-meaning, but he has memory problems. Here's his response.
I know there's some attention paid to some language in the report about my recollection of events. There's even reference that I don't remember when my son died. How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business. Let me tell you something. Some of you have commented, I wear since the day he died, every single day, the rosary he got from Our Lady of...
He just trails off. I mean, he can't even finish the name of the church that he got those rosaries from. The problem is, Biden on teleprompter, just like Trump on teleprompter, can do just fine. It's easy to read off of a thing and play that off as I know what I'm doing. The second either one of them goes off script, Trump more just rambles and goes on and he's kind of narcissistic about it. But Biden just can't figure out where he is. So he can't figure out what the name of the church is. And this is in response to specifically there is a... of course, if I stop this, I'll keep playing this and then I'll go back to the thing that he's referencing. Here we go.
Every Memorial Day, we hold a service remembering him, attended by friends and family and the people who loved him. I don't need anyone to remind me when he passed away or passed away. And so that's what we're pushing. And I'm pushing very hard now.
This is now him talking about the Israel-Gaza stuff.
Hostage ceasefire. Because, I've been working tirelessly in this deal. How can I say this without revealing it? To lead to a sustained pause in the fighting, in the actions taking place in the Gaza Strip. And because I think if we could get the delay for that, the initial delay, I think that we would be able to extend that so that we could increase the prospect that this fighting in Gaza changes. There's also negotiations. You may recall, in the very beginning, right before Hamas attacked, I was in contact with the Saudis and others to work out a deal where they would recognize Israel's right to exist let them make them part of the Middle East and recognize them fully in return for certain things that the United States would commit to do. And the commitment that we were proposing to do related to two items. I'm not going to go in detail, but one of them was to deal with the protection against their arch enemy to the northwest, northeast, I should say. The second one, by providing ammunition and material for them to defend themselves. Coincidentally,
like, this is still more like, what is he saying? I know what he's saying because I'm up to date on all this stuff, and I guess, and I'm a junkie and I know about all this crap, but he is not making any sense, I think, to anyone that doesn't know the situation in Israel, and that, like, they're enemies to the northeast. He means Hezbollah. I just don't think he could think of the word Hezbollah at the time. And he's mixing up, kind of like talking about what he's currently doing with what happened in the lead up to October 7th, which that's when they were negotiating with Saudis and Israel about, like, basically recognizing them as a country. And that's why most people think that Hamas took the actions they did on October 7th and Iran was cool with it, because Iran wants nothing to do with legitimate Israel, like, and other Middle Eastern, especially Arab nations recognizing Israel's right to be a state. And so he's just like, but he doesn't make any sense. And don't tell me for a second, and especially if you're watching this on Spotify or YouTube and not just listening, even looking at him, I mean, I think you can tell from just listening, but if you're looking at him, there's no way this is not a guy you would take away the keys from if he was your dad, right? Or grandpa. It just, I don't know. I think it's sad. We don't get to see him very much in front of not a teleprompter, because I think the White House knows and his staff knows that this is a disaster and he can't go off script. And this was specifically, he had walked off from the press conference and then someone shouted some question about Israel Hamas and he shuffled back to the podium and started just winging it. And there's a part that right-wing media is jumping on, and I understand. In this little preface thing, he basically says the president of Mexico, Sisi, he's referring to the president of Egypt. He got Egypt and Mexico mixed up, talking about Israel and Gaza and stuff. Look, that is something that people do all the time. Say the wrong country or say the wrong name. I'm not going, like I said, in the clip before, though, he did quickly realize his mistake and corrected it, and he didn't ever realize his mistake on the Mexico thing. But the Mexico part is not the problem for me. People are going to mix up a country or something every once in a while. The problem is that he's not only mixing up countries and stuff, he's misremembering. He's calling people names, like the president of France, who he said the name of the president of France from the 80s, who is dead. There was a situation, I cannot remember who it was. There was a congresswoman who died in a car wreck. It was really sad. And it was someone he knew pretty well. And she was dead. So she died like in July, and in August he was in that state, and he was like, now what's her name? And like looking for her. He knows she had died. He knew she died a month before. He had like called the family for condolences and things like that, but he had forgotten. And this is where his memory is actually affecting his job performance, in my opinion, because he's not remembering details, and then he's making decisions based on not remembering those details correctly. So a good example of that would be, the Afghanistan withdrawal. He claims that no one told him to keep troops in there, that like he was failed by his generals by not telling him. But that was contradicted, because we know that the generals told him, hey, you should keep some troops in Afghanistan or Taliban's just going to take back over. Mark Milley, suggested that they keep 2,500 troops, and went on record saying that he told the president as much leading up to the Afghanistan withdrawal. But Biden's either lying or doesn't remember that the generals told him to keep 2,500 troops in there. And so misremembering things absolutely does matter. And now there's all these mind experts on like sort of left media, CNN, NBC, Washington Post, New York Times, all these things that are saying, well, they're bringing these mind experts on. They're like, well, memory is important, but it's not as important as all these other things that age is great for. It's total spin. Everyone knows this is bad, and they're just trying to spin it to make it not look as bad, because they know they're stuck with him. They know their chance to, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but like, there's no chance to get rid of him right now. He is going to be the nominee unless he has a serious health issue or he decides to step down. And now they're just trying to make excuses for it because they realize that this is a vulnerability. 76% of the country thinks it's a problem. Okay, 76% people polled. This was a poll from just like, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So I'm curious if we'll see a new one after this debacle. But 76% of voters across the board think he's too old to serve a second term. He is not able to serve a second term. That includes 54% of Democrats that feel that way. So they're telling not just Republicans that this isn't happening. They're trying to pretend like this is just a right-wing media conspiracy that they're trying to say he's too old. If that's the true, the right-wing media has a lot more influence than I thought they did, because 76% of the country thinks he's too old. That's a lot of us, and we're not idiots, right? I think it's worth throwing this up here too. This is part of that that investigation, and specifically part of the report that shows specifically what the problems with his memory were. So this is quoting Robert Hur in the document. So in his interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended. Biden said, "If it was 2013, when did I stop being vice president?" I want to stop there for a second, because don't we all know the election calendar? It's leap years. It's 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020. This is really easy to keep track of. If you were the vice president for 2 terms, it would be pretty easy to figure out that you were vice president from 2009 to 2017, because they inaugurate on January of the following of the election. So elections in 2008, and you take office in 2009. So he didn't know when he was vice president. He was confused. Okay. And then he did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died. And his memory appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him. Among other things, he mistakenly said he had a real difference of opinion with General Carl Eikenberry, when in fact Eikenberry was an ally whom Biden cited approvingly in his Thanksgiving memo to President Obama. That's the memo I was talking about that he kept, trying to discourage Obama from sending more troops in. So he's even confusing the history of who was for things and who was against things. He has all the details wrong in this thing. And by the way, this is a 5 hours of interviews that took place over 2 days shortly after the October 7th attacks in Israel. And so part of the press conference was him going like, look, I sat down for 5 hours with these guys, and I gave them my time because I was trying to cooperate, but I was in the middle of a crisis at the time. And that's now a Democratic excuse too. It's like, well, look, he was dealing with a big geopolitical situation, and he had to take time out of his day to deal with this stupid thing where we're dealing with these dumb, some little documents that he left in his garage. Well, look, the president, part of his job is dealing with stressful situations. So if their excuse is that his memory is only bad because of the stressful geopolitical situation he was dealing with, that's what we expect presidents to have to deal with. Look at how much George W. Bush and Barack Obama aged in the 8 years they were in office, and they were in their 50s, right? You can see the gray hair, you can see the wrinkles, you can see that they age, you can see that the stress of the job ages them. That's happening to Biden, except that he was already 77 years old, or 76, 78 years old when he took office. So, imagine how rapidly it's happening to him, okay? I just don't understand how we think that this is okay. Okay, so here's the other thing. This is their basically excuse for not charging him for these documents. In a case where the government must prove that Mr. Biden knew he had possession of the classified Afghanistan documents after the vice presidency and chose to keep those documents, knowing he was violating the law, we expect that at trial his attorneys would emphasize these limitations in his recall. And I think that's right. Like his lawyers would just say, look, he is confused old man, or he has bad memory problems, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to get a jury likely to sympathize with him, especially because, keep in mind, the Justice Department is not going to bring charges against a sitting president. They'd have to wait till he left office, which is either January when he's 82 because he loses to Trump, or it's 4 years from then when he's 86. Are you really going to convict an 86-year-old can we imagine what he's going to be like in 4 or 5 years? I kind of shudder to think of what that's going to be like, okay? So, all of this is just to say that I didn't think that anything would come of this documents case anyway. It seemed like this is something that happens fairly often where it's not Joe Biden that's grabbing boxes of documents from his office and taking it to his private manor or his new office or whatever. It's staff, okay? Staff might grab the wrong stuff, and I think that that's absolutely a good excuse for why Mike Pence had documents. He found, I think there were just 2 or 3 documents that Mike Pence found after the Trump stuff. Trump had boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff. Biden had a few boxes as well, but it seems like most of the focus is on 2 things: his journal that he sort of took notes in, and the specific Afghanistan documents that he had for, I guess, sort of like proving his point that he was always against it. So that, to me, the specificity of the documents that are in Joe Biden's house, to me, proves that it wasn't staff, even though Joe Biden is trying to say, oh, it was staff that pulled this stuff. The fact that it's all about Afghanistan and it proves his point and kind of defends himself, I don't think that's a coincidence. It could be, but whatever. It doesn't matter, because there are going to be no charges coming from this regardless. And so we don't need to really, I don't know. There's not really anything that's going to come out of this report. And I don't think we should be upset that he's not getting prosecuted. I think there is a difference between Trump and Biden on this. And I think Trump's document case is kind of solid. He knew he had the documents. He tried to hide them. He tried to have other people hide them for him. They lied about if they had him or not, even though he knew he had them. He was bragging to people that didn't have clearance about stuff that he knew about from those classified documents and showing them people. It's more egregious for sure, and I think it's worth prosecution. However, that opening kind of sheet, the one page of why we chose not to do this, calling him an elderly man with memory problems, you have to go, okay, why should he be the president then if we don't, it's a good question, right? So that's where we're at, and I think that will be the impact of this investigation, is that it basically was an actual, from the federal government, admission that Biden's age and memory and mental capacity is a problem. Because I don't think it's just his memory that's the problem, right? It's really, it's lots of things. It's like not being able to find the right word, the way he shuffles around, the way they've had to change how he gets on Air Force One because he's going up the stairs. And look, I don't think that if someone is physically disabled from getting up the stairs, that doesn't mean they couldn't mentally have the fitness to be president just because it's hard to walk up the stairs. I mean, FDR was in a wheelchair, right? He couldn't walk at all. And I don't think that makes him, that's not why he's a good or bad president, right? And so I'm okay with some of the physical stuff. I'm not okay with the mental stuff. The mental stuff really bothers me because we are in a really scary time. We've got the Israel-Gaza stuff. We've got the Russia-Ukraine stuff. We've got China knocking on the door of Taiwan. I think it's very likely that the next president will have to deal with a China-Taiwan situation. Beyond all the geopolitical stuff, we're a mess here. We are now paying more interest on the national debt than we are Social Security or defense budgets. We've got just loads of problems here that the president is not in charge of all of them, but he certainly is supposed to be the leader that gets this kind of stuff done. And the truth is, with this kind of stuff, talking about his memory, I just don't think he's up to it. And so, let's talk about some more of these kind of excuses that the left gives. So, one thing is that they're saying this is just the right. This is right-hand media. They're using deceptive editing or showing the same small clips over and over again. And I kind of agree with this, except that the reason we have to use the same clips over and over again is because Biden doesn't get in front of cameras off a teleprompter almost ever. He actually doesn't take questions from the press almost ever. Say what you will about Donald Trump. Everyone that listens to this show knows that I don't like Donald Trump. Trump talked to the press all the time. Now, that's partially because he's a narcissist and loves the camera and loves the attention. But he talked to the press all the time. He would answer questions in the White House lawn all the time, right? So I will give him that. I think Trump did a good job of getting in front of cameras and talking to the press. Now, I don't think he was genuine in his answers to the press sometimes. I think he was wrong to berate the press the way he did. And Biden's doing the same thing. I didn't put it in the clip, but when someone asks him hey, is there something wrong with your memory? He replies, I guess there must be something because I let you talk. Because he called on him. That's a bad answer. That's not, first of all, you didn't give us any confidence that your memory is okay. You instead insulted the press guy that you just called on. You just insulted the journalist because he asked a decent question. He said, like, look, if the report says this, why is your memory good enough to be president? And he just shoots him down and insults him. And I don't like that. In the presidency, the office of the president should be better than this. And Trump was obviously worse at it, but Biden's the same way, and Obama was the same way. Obama tried to kick out Fox News from the White House press briefings, and the other press, to their credit, said, no, you can't revoke their press pass. And then Trump tried to do it to CNN, and Fox News defended them. And I appreciate that. But, Biden's basically only done two public addresses. Sorry, Biden has done two public addresses about this report, but he has not done a single public presser about our counterattacks on the Iran-backed proxies for their attack on killing 3 U.S. soldiers. So we did these 85 strikes in the week following those 3 U.S. soldiers dying, and we have not heard from the president about it. They all happened, and there was a press release, but Biden himself has not gotten in front of cameras or the press to talk about those counterattacks. And that's the president's job, in my opinion. We've only gotten, I can't remember how many, it was we've only had one press conference since October where he answered questions. He's trying to do the basement campaign again like he did in 2020. He had the convenient excuse of COVID in 2020, but I don't know how that's going to work in 2024. And I think that can you imagine Biden and Trump in a 2-hour long debate right now? I don't think it'll happen. I think it's a shame that we probably won't get to hear from the two candidates talking to each other and batting ideas back and forth, because neither one of them wants to do it, because I think both teams know that neither one of them can do it. That's my opinion. So I don't think anyone is buying this spin from the Democrats that oh, his memory's fine. He's totally fine. You hear from the White House press secretary, and you would think that he's in there doing push-ups in his office and running circles around his press. I mean, they talk about him like he's just, oh, this guy is so full of energy, I can't keep up with him, and he's just knocking it out of the park, and he's strong. And I mean, it's so much, it just reeks of propagandizing, right? And they just expect us to believe it. Fortunately, we don't. 76% of Americans think that he appears too old to them. And I think it's only going to get worse. They cannot run a basement campaign. They're going to have to campaign him. He's going to have to get in front of crowds. I think this will just get worse and worse. I think we will have, every time he gets in front of cameras or talks off the cuff, we're going to have something like this for the rest of this year. And so what's next? Here's the thing. Everyone on the right is saying, oh, you believe me, they will replace him at the last minute with Michelle Obama. I mean, that's the classic conspiracy theory, or Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmire or someone like that. They'll replace him and we'll be scrambling. I want to make super clear, there is no they. There is no group of people that controls the Democratic Party. Biden essentially controls the Democratic Party, and Trump essentially controls the Republican Party. If the parties had any control over choosing their nominees, if there were smoke-filled rooms or these, nefarious meetings where they decide who's going to do what and how they're going to rig what and stuff, if those existed, there's no chance Bernie Sanders would have sniffed the nomination in 2016, and there's no way Donald Trump would have gotten the nomination in 2016. There's no way that establishment version of the Republican Party would have allowed that to happen, or the Democrats allowed that to happen on Bernie Sanders, right? They have no control, and they've lost more control since 2016. The GOP is completely a Trump party now. There is no... Look, the head of the RNC just left, and by the way, so this is hilarious. She just left because she got forced out essentially by Trump. And the new chair is one person, but the person right beneath that is Trump's niece, okay? It's all about complete loyalty to Donald Trump on the GOP. And in the Democrat, it's basically, yeah, I think everyone's been thinking this for a while, that man, I really would hope that Biden just chooses to step down. But they won't even say out loud that he's too old and that he's not competent and he doesn't have the mental capacity to be the president for a second term. Most Democrats won't even say it out loud. So who do you think is getting together to force him out? And how would they do so? They don't have any mechanism to do that. He's going to run through the primary. There are only two options for Biden to not be the nominee in November. The first is a health problem that incapacitates him. I don't think that's beyond the realm of possibilities. He could have one fall. He could say one really crazy thing on a microphone that is enough that convinces someone. But here's the second part. The only person that can get him off the ticket is him. It's Biden. Biden will have to decide. If he's not incapacitated or dies, he's going to have to do something so bad that his wife will say, you really need to step down. It's going to be his decision. And so at the best case scenario, like Republicans are thinking, or honestly Democrats are thinking, because I think Republicans want to face off against Biden. Trump is actually beating him in the polls in several of the swing states that Biden absolutely needs to win. And so if that continues, that trend, like Republicans are happy to have Biden as the nominee because he's going to be easier to beat than any of these other potential Democratic candidates. Biden also wants Trump to be the nominee for the same reason. Like, really, Trump's the only person Biden can beat, and Biden's the only person Trump can beat. It's a really strange thing that we've landed on rematching these two candidates from 2020. So if there's some sort of medical thing or Biden does decide I'm going to step down, there's a great Politico article that was about like Democrats need a plan B, but the truth is like Democrats can't have a plan B because it's all going to be up to Biden. And so if that happened, just to let you know what would happen, it depends when it happens. If it's before the convention, they can pick someone new at the convention, and the Democrats have a weird convention kind of thing where they have these super delegates. It was a way for the party to try to keep some control in sort of the, well-to-do sort of elite crowd having something to do with picking who the nominee is. And they sort of used them in 2016 to help Hillary Clinton get the nomination. That's why like Bernie Sanders really almost had it. Really, the super delegates were the only people that kept Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination in 2016. Well, after that, they rewrote the rules because all the Democrats were up in arms about this isn't democratic and we shouldn't have these super delegates. And they basically said the super delegates only get to throw their power around in the second round of voting if there's no winner from the first round of voting at the convention, which also, that's not a brokered convention, hasn't happened in the Democrats, at least in my lifetime, I don't think. And so, but in this situation, it probably would come into play that the superdelegates would have something to say. If Biden actually stepped down and said, free for all, y'all pick someone else, all of his delegates would not be spoken for anymore. And so everyone would start fighting about, who they're going to bring to the table. And it would be all the normal names. Like I said, Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, obviously Kamala Harris would be in the running. I mean, I don't think she has a chance. She's less popular than Joe Biden is. And that's why, that's the other just amazing thing to me. Joe Biden, despite being in his late 70s when he decides to run for president, and everyone feeling a little apprehensive about, man, I don't know if we should elect someone that's that old. Are we flirting with a situation where we're going to actually have to use the vice presidency? So all of a sudden, the vice president is actually not just a warm bucket of spit. They actually have some worthwhile characteristics in the sense that, like, hey, this person could die or have a health crisis, have to step down. And so who's the vice president? And instead of picking someone competent and good at their job, he said, I'm going to pick he went with the identity politics route and said, I'm going to pick a black woman. And that's not to say that a black woman could not be competent at the job. I think there were actually other better black women he could have picked. Like, I can't remember her name, but the mayor of Atlanta would have been a good choice. Although she wasn't like a nationally, but she was a successful mayor and she was popular. And I think she would have been a better choice because she seems competent. She was a mayor. Whereas like Kamala Harris is just like shed staff. No one likes her. She's less popular. Sorry, that's my dog moaning in the background on the floor beneath me. So, he picked Kamala Harris. And so he didn't even pick the best black female candidate he could have. If Biden just picked a better vice president, of course, he can't get rid of her now. I think people would be more like, well, I'll vote for Biden because I like his vice president. But most people don't like his vice president. And so they're not going to vote for him. They can't get rid of Kamala Harris because you can't like hire her and then fire the first black female vice president. You can't do that. And no one realistically thinks she's next in line as far as if Biden said, I'm not going to run again, that she would just be crowned. Like, no one thinks that's what will happen. So there is no they, though. There's no one controlling all this stuff. There is no conspiracy here. This is just like Biden's old. Everyone knows it. Unless something happens to him and he dies or is incapacitated or has a serious enough health issue that he decides, right, I shouldn't run. He will be the nominee on the ballot in November. Just like Trump will be the nominee on the ballot in November unless similar situations happen to him. Okay. But these parties have completely abandoned their role in choosing good candidates. When they created the primary system in the 70s, they abandoned their ability to pick and choose who they wanted representing their party. So the parties have no power. They have no say in this matter whatsoever. Basically, they're just arms. The parties are just arms of whoever is currently the president. That's essentially all they do now. They're just like defenders of that person. And until that person leaves and they have to find a new nominee, they're really totally powerless, and they don't seem to actually care about their party winning, or we wouldn't have such bad candidates. We wouldn't have two super unpopular candidates if the parties had any power. So it just won't happen. So, I think the only other things that could possibly convince him, other than some sort of major health thing, by the way, if a few months from now, with all the focus on Trump, because we've really not been seeing as much about Trump over the last year, I'd say. I mean, you do if you pay attention like me, but he's been a little out of the news because some of it's not the campaign. Like, the presidential campaign is going to start earlier this year than normal because both nominees basically have it locked up. It's definitely going to be Trump. It's definitely going to be Biden. Nikki Haley's still in the race, but she doesn't really have a chance unless something actually happens to Trump, like he has a, physical problem or he dies or something like that, right? And so, if a few months from now, Trump is still leading in those swing states that currently he's leading in the polls, because I think most people... polls are not necessarily indicative of how people are going to vote in November, especially right now. A lot can change between now and then. But they are indicative that people feel like things were better under Trump economically. And so here's the thing. There are two issues that are at the top of Americans' minds right now. It was inflation and the economy. That was at the top of the list. And that's been swapped out by immigration and the border, because the border is such a mess, especially now that what happened. I mean, this was a thing at the time that I said, I don't love it as a political stunt. I don't like using people as a political stunt, but like Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis and these border state, Florida's not a border state, but these border state people sending these migrants to sanctuary cities like Chicago and New York and California and stuff. What's interesting about that is that it really did change some Democrats and independents' minds, because all of a sudden they're seeing that, right now Chicago's going through a lot of turmoil because the citizens are super pissed, and some of the even elected officials are like, we're spending all this money on illegal immigrants and we are not actually helping our poor citizens. We're actually, all of our money and resources are going to help these illegal immigrants, and it's not helping our citizenry, the actual United States citizens that live in this city. And they're like, look, we don't blame Greg Abbott. He didn't ask for this, but we asked for this. We said, we're going to be a sanctuary city. We are not going to help we're not going to help immigration enforcement. It's a safe place to be. And so, you know what? Guess where some of these migrants want to go? They want to go to Chicago. They want to go to New York. They want to go to San Francisco. They want to go to these sanctuary cities where they know they probably won't get deported. And now those cities, now that they're having to deal with the consequences of the border crisis, and they didn't have to before, people's minds are changing. You can see it in the polls. They care now about the border. And Biden has not done a good job on the border. Trump wins on the border, right? And Trump also wins on inflation and stuff, even though Trump contributed to inflation, COVID contributed to inflation, and so did Biden. It's all three of them. But the truth is, Trump and Biden made it way worse than it would have been if it was just COVID, right? Trump could have had better policies, but people still remember the rosiness of pre-2020 economics. And so they're giving Trump an edge on both those things. So if he still looks like he's leading in the polls, maybe Biden will go, this looks pretty bad. If I'm the guy that loses this, if he really feels that Trump is the threat that he claims he is, the right thing to do would be for him to go, I'm going to step down and let someone else that might be able to beat him try in November. Those are the only things, though, I think that would convince him. And I don't think that last one is very likely, because Biden, in that same press conference I played a clip from, basically said, I'm the only person in the country that's qualified and good enough to be president, which is just so narcissistic and not true. I mean, it's just not true. There are other Democrats that would be a better president than him. There are certainly other Republicans that would be better president than him. There are probably 50 governors that would be better than him or Donald Trump. I'd probably take almost any governor in the country over either one of them right now. Don't totally quote me on that. I don't know the record of every governor in the country, but if they're not 80, that's a good start. And if they have some sort of executive experience, like being a governor, also a good start. I just don't think that any of these situations will happen. I think that Biden is so stubborn. I think he's old. How many 80-year-olds do you know that change their mind about anything, especially 80-year-old men? Okay. We're stubborn. Okay. Men, we're stubborn. And I think it only gets worse as we get older. So I don't have a lot of hope that Biden's going to have this epiphany that like, I should do good for the country and step down so that Trump doesn't become president again. I don't think he'll do it. So I think we're destined for a Trump-Biden rematch in November, unless something crazy happens, which I say all the time, certainly could happen because something crazy happens every week, it feels like. And so we'll see what happens. But that's essentially Biden's memory stuff. It's just nice to have it in an actual government report that says his memory's bad. And not being able to remember when your son died. I get that Biden acts all, how dare he ask me that question? I'd love to see the transcript of this actually, because I don't think he actually asked that question. I think what probably happened is that we were establishing timeline stuff and Biden maybe brought up that, whatever. I don't know how it happened, but I would love to see the transcript to know, like, why would Robert Hur ask him, what year did your son die? I don't think that Robert Hur was trying to test Biden's memory. I think that Robert Hur is trying to get a timeline, figure out what's going on. When did they get the documents? When did you know about the documents? Why did you use the documents? He was doing writing a book with a ghostwriter. Did you share that stuff with him? I think he's trying to get a timeline for stuff. In the clip, Biden's trying to say, like, how dare you ask me when my son died? I know when my son died. You don't have to remind me when my son died. It's like, okay, then is Robert Hur lying that you didn't know within years when he died? I doubt it. What would Robert Hur's point be in doing that? We've established that the Department of Justice does not care for Trump. That's why the FBI had to fire people who were trying to prevent Trump from becoming president in 2016. That's why they had to change some of their rules and guidelines for how they do stuff. So I just don't buy that this report is nefarious in any way. I think it's just, he's just saying exactly what he saw. We saw the same thing happen with John Fetterman before his election, when an NBC, I think, reporter sat down with him and was like, he could not understand anything. He couldn't comprehend anything I was asking him, and just stated the facts. He didn't seem like he was there. And I'm glad that Fetterman has recovered from his stroke. Like, I did not think I thought that was rolling the dice too much with his stroke, but at least he was a stroke victim, and some stroke victims do recover. And he's got his speech. He seems to have his mental faculties. In fact, I think the stroke might have made him, a little bit more conservative, not conservative necessarily, but he's certainly calling out the left a lot on the progressive left on stuff like Israel, Palestine stuff. And, who knew that I did not have Fetterman being the reasonable Democrat in the Senate on my bingo card, but we do. But Biden's not going to recover from this. He's not going to get any younger. None of this is going to get better. None of it. It's only going to get worse. His memory will not get better. His speech will not get better. His mental faculties will not get better. His physical capabilities will not get better. And watching that press conference, I cannot imagine what, like, a leader of one of our enemy countries is thinking, looking at that, going like, I can't believe we're going to get this guy for president for 4 more years potentially. That's got to be exciting, because that guy is not doing his job, and he's not going to be able to handle it. So I don't know what we're going to do in November. I certainly didn't vote for either one of these guys in 2020. I'm not saying you have to feel the same way. That's just how I felt. I didn't like them in 2020. I certainly like them even less now. I think Trump, by the way, for all of his ability to say, look at Biden and how old he is. I think he's lost a step too. I think that there's plenty of, you watch him just ramble now. I think he used to really be able to work the crowd, and I think he was doing things in 2016 and even 2020 that he was certainly a certain force. And now, like, he's just kind of rambling in these town hall events he has, and these big rallies and stuff. He's just kind of rambling about the stolen election thing for a couple hours. He's kind of losing the crowd sometimes, and he does not. I think he's getting crazier. He's got a different mental problem, though. I don't think it's just all old age. But Biden's, Trump is old too. He's 77. So he'll be in his 80s if he gets another term before it ends. I don't know why we've chosen to pick these two people. I don't know why we've done it, but we have, and that's where we're at. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you for joining me. If you like the podcast or the content, please share it with someone that is like-minded. And by like-minded, I just mean sick of all this stuff and can't believe that we're heading towards a rematch in 2024, or, the kind of divisiveness and the rottenness. And there's just a lot of bad stuff out there right now. And so if you know someone that feels similarly, wants to check out politics, maybe share this with them, see if they might like this. I would really appreciate that. It helps me a lot. You can also follow me on Instagram and YouTube at The Homeless Conservative. I do short content there on just kind of like the newsy stuff. You can follow me there. You can also rate the podcast. That helps me a lot too. Rate it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts. Thank you for joining. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.